I think seeing the team and people grow, right? Of course, I'm not saying everybody will stay with the company for 3, 4, 10 years, that kind of thing. I'm saying even if you see them grow for 2 years, they stay at your company, you still appreciate that 2 years and the value they contributed to the company. And also, did we help to advance their career? My name is Jonathan Egg, and I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Partipost. Partipost is a crowd influencer marketing platform. We started in around 2017, right? And we're now in over 5 countries. Sure, Singapore, we started with Singapore first. Our next country was in Indonesia, and then Taiwan also. Last year we launched in Malaysia and Philippines. So before Partipost, I started working at a investment place, a family office. And my job was actually to do algorithmic trading, right? So did a lot of programming and trading of the stock markets, right, in the US and Forex markets. So when I started that, every day you wake up a little bit later and you sleep at 4 a.m., right? So you're trying to trade the US markets. And it was very exciting at the beginning, but you're working by yourself, you're sleeping at 4 a.m. every day, and I felt I didn't really feel like I brought a lot of value to other people, right? You know, you're just trading, buying and selling stocks, and you're making money, but when do I use that money, right? And how do I give back to society in some small ways? So then thought of our idea, Partipost, right, which is a crowd influencer platform. Then I convinced my 2 other co-founders to start this journey with me. That was the motivation for starting a company, right? And our idea started from, we didn't first use the word influencer or KOL. We actually thought that we saw so many people on social media, right? All our friends, girlfriends or whatever, right? And before eating at a restaurant, they always take pictures, right? So I said, how come people cannot make money from it? These regular people, right? And we thought, even if I have 200 followers or 500, I'm not a big influencer, right? How can I still make a little bit of money, right? And I thought, maybe we can build a platform to do that. So our goal is actually not really at the beginning to work with the big mega influencer celebrities, is to actually to work with the everyday person, right? And how do we get everyone on a platform and then help the brands also to connect to them? I would say it's my father. He was a businessman before, and he worked in Silicon Valley in the US, right? And moved to Taiwan, moved to Singapore, and also Malaysia. And then he started his own company too. So, and it's a listed company, right? So since young, I saw him working really hard, right? All the time, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., all the time. And on weekends, he would just sleep the whole afternoon, right? So I think it also inspired me to do something similar, right? Definitely, I think a lot of people would say COVID or the pandemic was a huge challenge. I think my hair became very white, after that, right? On the side, everywhere. Because you have to think about the numbers, right? The revenue, the costs, and do we need to do pay cuts to our team members? And they also have families, right? So it's a very, very tough decision at that time, I think. But thankfully, I think after the first maybe 4, 5, 6 months, right? We're also in the digital space, right, with influencers. So I think a lot of businesses adapted, right? And then they continue to use our service. right, to use our platform, and it was better. But yeah, I think that first half of the year in 2020 was the most challenging. I think the team gets all the credit, right? Actually, all I did was tell them, please work harder, right? And try to motivate them, give them some, motivating speech or something. But I just told them if we can either let go or cut a few people and no one will get a pay cut, or we can everybody get 15%, 30% pay cut, and we take it together. Because I don't know who's not performing well, or who's performing well is it because of the pandemic, right? And everybody's really nice. They say we'll take the pay cut, right? And then go through together. And I said, wow, okay. So of course, I did talk to each person, right? And I said, if you're going through some tough times, you let me know. Maybe I can help you, give you a loan or something, right? Yeah. So I think it's the human aspect of things that you have to really care for each and every person. I think the best part is, for me anyways, I think it's seeing the team and the people grow, right? Of course, I'm not saying everybody will stay with the company for 3, 4, 10 years, that kind of thing. I'm saying even if you see them grow for 2 years, they stay at your company, you still appreciate that 2 years and the value they contributed to the company. And also, did we help to advance their career, right? So I think it has to be a win-win situation. And then maybe they move to another company, right? And they're doing very well. I think that's great when we help them, right? So I think that makes me feel that we did something helpful to everyone. Yeah. So, but that's me, personally, right? I like to see people grow and things like that. I actually used to want to be a professor, in a university, but my dad said it doesn't make much money, so that's why I did this, I guess. The worst things is, I think everyone will say this, but it's having to let people go, right? Especially the ones that are working very hard, right? The ones that are doing very amazing or doing very poorly is very obvious, right? It's the one that is working very hard but not performing, and you don't know how to say to them, right? Do you give them more chance because you see them trying, or do you say you did not perform to everyone else, right? So I think that part is always the most challenging part, and maybe sometimes they just need one more month, right? But sometimes they don't, right? So that's very tough. One-on-one meetings are very important, right? The one-on-one meetings, like maybe every week or every month at least, you really have to grow people or develop them as best as you can in a very personalized or customized way, right? Not every rule or thought applies to everyone at different phases of their careers, right? So, but also, I'm only one person, right? You cannot one-on-one with every person. So I think it's grooming the next manager, right? And how do I become a better leader of leaders or manager of managers, right? So it's a very complicated answer, right? And it's more nuanced than that. But I think the easy answer is you have to hire people and be really patient and enjoy it. Well, I think we're similar, but also different than the usual, the influencer or KOL agencies, right? In a typical traditional influencer agency, the brands will approach an agency and say, can you help me, find X number of influencers to work with? Then the agency will, one by one, maybe DM, maybe contact them, right? And see if they want to work together. So the process is quite manual. It's quite time-consuming also, right? So what we do is we build a platform. We have a mobile app on one end for the influencers to download, right? And our influencer definition is different. can actually only have 200 followers, you can actually join our platform, right? So almost anyone can be, quote unquote, an influencer. Then on the other side, there's the brands, and they have their own. We built a web app for them, like a dashboard for them to use, right? So then they can go online, use the dashboard, and quickly, create a campaign, approve, look through the profiles of the influencers, and manage the campaign all the way to the end, right? So what we've done is build a platform to scale it, right? So a lot of, it's a lot less manual, and for us in our team, we don't need so much people to handle so many brands and campaigns. Every phase of our startup is a bit different, and different countries also a bit different too. But it's fun, it's challenging, right? But I would say the overall strategy when you first launch a market is you look at the one that's the, lowest hanging fruit, we call it, right? The one that's kind of the easiest, the cheapest to acquire, and the influencers that are most digitally savvy, right? So we just copy what maybe Facebook did, right? You go to the universities, right? They need a little bit of money on the side. They know how to use apps very fast, right? They grew up with it. And so we just went to a lot of universities, schools, and asked them to join. We basically go to the school and ask them, please download our app. From there, you can see when it's face-to-face, you can feel the feedback, right? If they don't like the app, they tell you. If you advertise online, right, then you don't know exactly if they drop off, they don't want to download, you don't know why, right? But when you're in person, it's very good to start like that at the beginning and then get the feedback, and then we can iterate on the app and make changes to the app. Yeah, so that's the influencer side. But now we do a lot of different other, tactics and Instagram ads, the usual things like that, or events, stuff like that. For the brand side, we approach it like a lot of other B2B businesses, right? So we have our own sales, business development team, right? They reach out to a lot of the brands, the marketing departments, right? Marketing teams of those brands, and then ask them to run a campaign with us. So that's usually how we do it. I think all markets are quite challenging, actually. Probably Indonesia is very challenging. I think because it's so big, right? And there's so much potential here, right? So each one has their own challenges, but probably Indonesia will be the most challenging to continue to keep growing every year. Yeah. I think influencer marketing is basically going through someone else's mouth, right? Word of mouth, right? But through the mouth of a celebrity, through the mouth of someone slightly famous, more followers, right? Or in our case, we have our micro or nano meaning very small influencer, which is any regular person, right? Word of mouth marketing has been around forever, right? So I think it's already proven itself. Now it just looks like another form, right? It's just online and digital, right? So is it effective? I don't think I need to prove that word of mouth is effective, but how do we measure it and optimize it for brands, and then we can track things is through online, right? So I think we can bring that kind of strength to brands online, and we can track which type of influencers can affect and drive ROI for which brands better. I mean, of course, it depends on the objective, right? So, and the KPIs that they're looking for, which part of the marketing funnel that they're looking at specifically, from awareness. A lot of FMCG brands work with us. They look for awareness only, and then reaching out to the right target audience, target consumers. Then others, brands or businesses, they're looking at generating leads, insurance companies, right? For example, there are others that, of course, a lot of SMEs wants to see conversions, right, and sales after, maybe less than a few months they want to see, right? So all of these are different KPIs that the brands have, and we have a different strategy for each of them depending on the brand. I won't go into every detail now, but we do have certain strategies for them. But I think that ultimately, we need to bring sales in the long term for the clients. So I think that's the most important. Family is interesting in terms of careers, right? I feel like it's like you have multiple families in every job, right? You can call it closer friends, you can call it like a brotherhood or sisterhood, I guess, right? So I think wherever you go, and I'm always traveling. I'm very lucky to travel to each of the markets, countries that we're in. So every country I see, they have their own little cliques or groups and families that they've developed. Maybe the colleagues join at the same time, then they become a family. But as we grow in bigger size, there's definitely less of a family feeling, right? But you will always remember those ones that you kind of start with or work together long term with. So I think there's a bunch of different families. I don't know if I answered your question perfectly, but there's every country there's people that's very close to you. Finding a balance between a lot of different things, right? Some people, when you say you should be very persistent, right? It's because they're not persistent enough, right? So you tell them be persistent, but when should you stop? Maybe you tried 20 times. Maybe you should stop and move on to something else, right? So I think what's the right balance between being persistent, right? You hear a lot of people say, my leadership principles is, be persistent, be this, do this. Then some other person I hear says like a little bit different, right? So I think it really depends on the person, right? And trying to find a balance between, what's the right type of persistence, what's the right type of obviously have integrity, but when you have too much, are you too stubborn, right? So I think for us and for the company and me, it's really finding the right balance that's customized or personal to you. Yeah. Hi, I'm Jonathan Egg, the founder and CEO of Partipost. Grow and sharing.